Smoking marijuana increases prolactin in men and women, which will reduce dopamine and testosterone. Smoking marijuana chronically, meaning more than twice a week, does appear to reduce testosterone significantly and elevate so-called aromatase enzymes. Contrast that with studies of the acute use of cannabis and THC, where people who are not regular users come into the laboratory and now suddenly, with institutional guidelines and safety protocols, are under the influence of THC and cannabis. Well, now you're dealing with a person who may not have experience with the elevated heart rate and blood pressure that's characteristic of cannabis, because it is a stimulant, at least when initially brought into the system, even if it might eventually lead to relaxation. So now you've got someone who's anxious or somebody who's not anxious, and you're trying to study these effects. So it's a moving target of sorts. It's very complicated to study marijuana and cannabis and its various derivatives in this way. Now you can probably appreciate better as to why there's so little nuanced data about sativa versus indica versus different ratios of CBD and THC. It's really difficult to do these studies in the first place. That said, the general rules are smoking marijuana increases prolactin in men and women, which will reduce dopamine and testosterone. Smoking marijuana chronically, meaning more than twice a week, does appear to reduce testosterone significantly and elevate so-called aromatase enzymes, which are the enzymes that convert testosterone into estrogen. This might partially explain the effect that occurs in about 35% of males, which is gynecomastia, which is a development of breast tissue in males, in particular young males who have elevated levels of testosterone or who are taking exogenous testosterone for testosterone replacement therapy, or if they're taking high doses anabolic steroids, or in females, the increase in breast size, which is due to additional estrogen from testosterone converted to estrogen. So it does appear that marijuana and cannabis increase estrogen, reduce testosterone, increase prolactin, especially in chronic users. Now, I'm sure that some people out there will say, well, their testosterone levels are exceedingly high, or they are fine, meaning the constellation of symptoms associated with low testosterone and elevated estrogen are not present in them. That probably means one of two things. They either had elevated levels of testosterone to begin with, so their ceiling was higher, so bringing it down didn't have that much of an effect, or that they have very low levels of aromatase in their system. There is some anecdotal evidence that smoking particular parts of the marijuana plant, in particular the seeds, can increase aromatase and the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. I think in the old days, the lore was the seeds make you sterile, and I think that was related to what I just told you, this increase in conversion of testosterone to estrogen. There's a vast literature on the effects of cannabis on fertility. It does seem to alter sperm motility and sperm health and function when taken chronically more than twice per week, in particular high doses of high potency THC. This is something we will cover in far more detail on a future episode all about fertility. And in females, there's an increase in estrogen as a consequence of smoking marijuana and increasing prolactin and estrogen in parallel. Whether or not that's detrimental isn't clear, although elevated estrogen and prolactin can be associated, not necessarily, and certainly not causative, but can be associated with elevated levels of or frequency of breast cancer detection. So cannabis and its effects on hormones are not without consequence. There are effects of cannabis on cortisol. In some individuals, it greatly increases cortisol due to the anxiety and paranoia it can create. And in other individuals, it reduces cortisol. Again, we have these divergent effects. But I want to be very clear. The effects on prolactin, meaning elevated prolactin, the effects on testosterone, meaning, at least most studies point to reduced levels of testosterone and increased estrogen. That seems to be true for most all individuals that chronically use cannabis, whereas the effects on cortisol tend to be divergent. Cannabis increases cortisol in some individuals and decreases cortisol in others. In general, increases in cortisol that are ongoing are not healthy for us. And then, of course, there are other effects on hormones, and I'll just briefly summarize those, that THC in particular, not CBD, but THC in particular, is known to be strongly inhibitory for something called gonadotropin-releasing hormone. This is a hormone that's released from the brain, from the hypothalamus, that then feeds onto, or I should say signals to the pituitary gland, which is also near the roof of your mouth. A lot of stuff happening near the roof of your mouth, it turns out, biologically. And reduced levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone caused by cannabis use, reduced levels of LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, which reduce levels of testosterone and sperm production in males, and egg health and ovulation and menstrual function in females. Now, I'm sure there are a number of women out there who will say they have perfectly normal menstrual cycles despite using cannabis. I'm certainly not going to dispute that. But if you are somebody who's trying to maximize fertility or regulate or balance hormones, marijuana and cannabis reduces GnRH, that is the gonadotropin released from the hypothalamus, and thereby reduces luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which are released from the pituitary and travel in the bloodstream to support normal ovarian function and health and normal testicular function and health in females and males, respectively.